Look at your hand. Look at the complexity of your own skin, the veins running beneath it, and the nervous system that allows you to feel the air around you. We walk through our lives assuming that we are a natural part of this planet, a byproduct of time and chance. We are told a very specific story from the moment we are born. We are told that we are the winners of a genetic lottery, the result of millions of years of slow trial and error evolution. We are told that we crawled from the mud, grew legs, stood up, and eventually built skyscrapers. But there is a problem with that story. It is a problem that biologists and anthropologists whisper about in the quiet corners of academia, but rarely address in the open. The problem is time. When we look at the history of life on Earth, we see a pattern. It is a pattern of slow, gradual, and painful change. Species adapt over millions of years to fit their environment. Crocodiles have remained virtually unchanged for 200 million years because they are perfectly suited to their habitat. The great apes, our supposed cousins, have lived in the rainforests for millions of years, yet they still live in the canopy, they still forage for fruit, and they still exist in balance with nature. But then, there is us. In the grand timeline of the cosmos, humanity appeared in the blink of an eye. We are the anomaly. We are the glitch in the algorithm of nature. To understand why the theory of accidental evolution fails to explain us, we have to look at the human brain. This organ is the most complex structure in the known universe. It contains more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But it is not the complexity that is suspicious. It is the speed at which it appeared. About 2 million years ago, the ancestors of humanity had a brain size roughly equivalent to a modern chimpanzee. For millions of years, that brain size remained stable. It was enough to survive, enough to hunt, and enough to reproduce. Nature does not waste energy. Evolution does not create luxury items. It creates survival tools. And yet, in a sudden, inexplicable explosion of biological growth, the human brain tripled in size. This event happened in an evolutionary microsecond. Somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 years ago, our brain capacity exploded. We developed the neocortex, the center of higher reasoning, art, mathematics, and philosophy. We developed the ability to speak, to communicate complex, abstract ideas, and to manipulate our environment. This does not fit the model of natural selection. In nature, a species develops a trait because it needs it to survive. But the early human did not need the ability to calculate the distance to the stars or to paint images on cave walls just to escape a predator. We were given a supercomputer when all we needed was a calculator. Furthermore, this rapid expansion came with a terrible cost, a cost that natural selection should have eliminated. The human brain is an energy hog. It consumes 20% of our body's energy, despite only taking up 2% of our body weight. It makes us weak. It requires us to consume massive amounts of food, and perhaps most damning of all, it makes childbirth deadly. Because of our massive skulls, human childbirth is uniquely dangerous compared to any other mammal. Before modern medicine, the act of bringing a human into the world was a game of Russian roulette for both the mother and the child. If evolution is a process of survival of the fittest, why would it select for a trait that kills the mothers of the species? Why would nature design a creature that is physically weaker, slower, and more vulnerable than its primate cousins, only to burden it with a brain that requires massive resources to function? The standard answer is that we learned to cook meat, which gave us the calories to grow our brains. But other animals eat meat. Other animals have had access to the same resources, yet they did not build civilizations. They did not leave the planet. We are the only ones. The gap between the most intelligent animal and the average human is not just a gap of degree, it is a gap of kind. It is the difference between a stone and a microchip. This suggests that something happened to us. Something intervened. If we look at the fossil record, we are looking for a missing link, a smooth transition from the primitive ape to the modern man. But that link has never been found. What we find instead are sudden jumps. We see a primitive species, and then, suddenly, we see a species with art, with culture, with ritual burial, and with a brain that is fundamentally different from anything that came before it. It is as if a switch was flipped. It is as if a new code was uploaded into the biological hardware of an existing species. This brings us to the uncomfortable possibility that we are not entirely of this world. We share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, but that 2% difference contains the code for everything that makes us human. That 2% is the difference between sleeping in a tree and walking on the moon. Where did that code come from? Did it truly assemble itself by random chance in such a short window of time? Or was it inserted? We have to ask ourselves if Earth is a garden or if it is a laboratory. If we are the result of a natural process, then we should see other species following in our footsteps. We should see other intelligences rising. But we are alone on this pedestal. We are a biological impossibility. We are a creature that is ill-suited for the wild, yet we dominate the planet. We are a species that is obsessed with the stars, almost as if we are looking for something we left behind. Perhaps the reason we cannot find the missing link on Earth is because the missing link did not originate on Earth. Perhaps the jump in our evolution was not a step up a ladder, but an injection from a syringe. To understand who we are, we have to stop looking at the ground and start looking at the sky. We have to consider the possibility that the seeds of humanity were not blown here by the wind, but were planted by a gardener. If the sudden expansion of the human brain is the software anomaly of our existence, then our blood is the hardware evidence. Blood is the river of life. It carries the history of our species, written in the language of proteins and enzymes. For nearly all species on Earth, this history is linear and logical. You can trace the bloodlines back through time, seeing the clear connections between ancestor and descendant. But in humans, there is a break in the line. There is a specific genetic marker that shouldn't be there, or rather, the absence of a marker that suggests we are not who we think we are. This is the mystery of Rh-negative blood. To understand why this is so strange, we have to look at how blood types are classified. Most people are familiar with the ABO system, but there is another factor involved, the rhesus factor. In the 1930s, scientists discovered a specific protein on the surface of red blood cells. They named it the rhesus factor because they first found it in the rhesus monkey, a primate species that shares a significant amount of DNA with humans. If you have this protein, you are Rh positive. If you do not have it, you are Rh negative. This seems simple enough until you look at the numbers. In nature, genes that are disadvantageous are usually weeded out by natural selection. Evolution is ruthless. It does not keep traits that threaten the survival of the species. Yet, Rh-negative blood exists, and it carries a terrifying secret. It is the only time in nature where a mother's body will actively try to kill her own offspring. If an Rh-negative mother is pregnant with an Rh-positive baby, her immune system identifies the child not as her own flesh and blood, but as a foreign invader. Her body produces antibodies to attack the fetus, to destroy it as if it were a virus or a parasite. This condition is called hemolytic disease. Think about the implications of that. In the entire animal kingdom, a mother's body is designed to nurture and protect the life growing inside her. It is the most fundamental biological imperative. Why would human biology evolve a mechanism that causes a mother to attack her own child? This kind of rejection is typically seen in only one other scenario in nature: hybridization. When two different species mate, like a horse and a donkey creating a mule, there are often genetic complications, sterility, or immunological issues. The existence of Rh-negative blood and the violent immune response it triggers suggests that at some point in our distant past, two different genetic lines were merged that were not meant to be mixed. If we evolved naturally from primates, we should all be Rh-positive. All monkeys are Rh-positive. All apes are Rh-positive. It is the primate standard. So where did the negative factor come from? It appeared suddenly, roughly 35,000 years ago, seemingly out of thin air. It is not a mutation found in the rest of the primate family tree. Some researchers have boldly suggested that this is the smoking gun of extraterrestrial intervention. If the rhesus factor is the mark of the earthly primate, then the lack of it, Rh-negative, could be the mark of the outsider. It implies that a portion of humanity carries DNA that did not originate from the chaotic evolution of Earth's jungles. And this blood type is not evenly distributed across the planet. It is highly concentrated in very specific groups and regions. The Basque people of Spain and France, for example, have the highest concentration of Rh-negative blood in the world. Their language, Euskara, is also an isolate. It is unrelated to any other known language on Earth. It is as if they are a remnant of an older, different stock of humanity. We also see high concentrations of this blood type in the royal families of Europe. This brings a literal meaning to the term blue blood. For centuries, royal lines were obsessed with purity, with keeping their bloodlines clean and separate from the common population. They claimed a divine right to rule, asserting that they were descended from the gods. Could this obsession with lineage be a distorted memory of a genetic truth? Were they trying to preserve a specific genetic trait that linked them to the architects of humanity? The implications are unsettling. If Rh-negative blood is indeed a legacy of an off-world interaction, it means that humanity is not a single, uniform race. It means we are a mosaic. Some of us carry the pure, earthly lineage of the primate, fully integrated with the planet's biology. Others carry a recessive gene, a silent marker of a star-faring ancestor. It creates a subtle divide, a biological difference that goes deeper than skin color or culture. Scientists have tried to explain this away as a random mutation, but random mutations usually happen to help a species survive. A mutation that kills babies and mothers does not help survival. It should have been wiped out thousands of years ago, yet it persists. It stays in the gene pool, passing down from generation to generation, a silent alarm bell ringing in our DNA. When you combine the mystery of the exploding brain with the mystery of the rejecting blood, a picture starts to form. We have a brain that grew too fast, and blood that fights itself. We are a biological puzzle. The pieces have been forced together. We are a chimera species, a blend of the terrestrial and the something else. The Galactic Seeders theory argues that this was not an accident. The introduction of this new DNA was a deliberate upgrade, a genetic modification program designed to lift a primitive species into consciousness. But like any transplant, there is a risk of rejection. The host body fights the new organ. Humanity is still fighting that battle today, caught between our animal instincts and our alien intellect, between the blood of the earth and the blood of the stars. We have looked at the anomaly of the human mind and the mystery of human blood. But to truly understand the scope of the Galactic Seeder theory, we have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of humanity, but the beginning of life itself. The standard scientific model tells us that life on Earth began in a primordial soup. Billions of years ago, lightning struck a pool of chemicals, and by sheer accident, those chemicals arranged themselves into the first self-replicating molecule. It is a romantic idea. It suggests that life is an inevitable consequence of chemistry. But there is a flaw in this theory, and it was pointed out by the very man who unlocked the secret of life itself. In 1953, Francis Crick and James Watson discovered the double helix structure of DNA. It was one of the most important moments in scientific history. For the first time, we understood that life was not just biology, it was information. DNA is a code, a 4-letter alphabet that writes the instructions for every living thing. But as Francis Crick spent the next 2 decades studying this code, he became troubled. He realized that the complexity of DNA was too great to have evolved by chance in the time available on early Earth. He calculated the odds of a single protein assembling itself by accident. The probability was so infinitesimally small that it was mathematically impossible. He compared it to a hurricane sweeping through a junkyard and accidentally assembling a fully functional Boeing 747. In 1973, Francis Crick and the chemist Leslie Orgel published a paper that shocked the scientific community. They proposed a theory called directed panspermia. Notice the word directed. Regular panspermia is the idea that life hitched a ride on a comet or a meteor and crashed into Earth by accident. It is random. But Crick argued that life was too fragile to survive a million-year journey on a burning rock. Instead, he proposed that the seeds of life were intentionally placed inside a protected payload. He suggested that an advanced civilization, facing the end of their own world or simply seeking to expand, launched thousands of canisters into the universe. These canisters would contain bacteria, the simplest and most durable form of life, locked in stasis, waiting to land on a habitable rock. Crick's theory transforms the story of Earth. It means our planet was not a lucky accident, but a target. It was chosen. And there is a specific piece of evidence that supports this: a smoking gun buried in the periodic table of elements. That evidence is a metal called molybdenum. All life on Earth relies on specific enzymes to function, and many of these crucial enzymes require molybdenum as a catalyst. Without it, life as we know it simply stops. But here is the problem. Molybdenum is incredibly rare on Earth. It is the 54th most common element in the Earth's crust. It is scarce. Chromium and nickel are chemically very similar to molybdenum and are far more abundant on our planet. If life had evolved naturally from the chemicals present in the Earth's primordial soup, it should have used chromium or nickel. Biology uses what is available. It does not develop a dependency on a resource that practically doesn't exist. Crick pointed out that this dependency makes no sense unless life did not start here. If life evolved on a planet where molybdenum was common, it would naturally build its biological machinery around that metal. If that life was then frozen, packed into a spaceship, and sent across the galaxy to Earth, it would arrive with that dependency already hard-coded into its DNA. We are addicted to a metal that doesn't belong here. We are like a diver bringing a tank of air into the ocean. We brought our own biological requirements from a different home world. This theory also explains the Cambrian explosion. For billions of years, life on Earth was simple. Single-celled organisms, slime, bacteria. Nothing changed. It was a stagnant pond. Then, suddenly, roughly 540 million years ago, complexity exploded. In a geological blink of an eye, the oceans were filled with eyes, legs, shells, and nervous systems. It was a biological Big Bang. The fossil record shows no gradual build-up to this event. It just happened. Directed panspermia offers a solution. The payload arrived. The seed cracked open. The advanced genetic instructions that had been traveling through the void were finally released, and the terraforming of Earth began. If this hypothesis is true, it changes our relationship with the universe. We are not alone, because we are the children of the cosmos. The bacteria that started life on this planet were not random dust. They were a message in a bottle. They were an ark. And if there was an ark, there must be a shipbuilder. This moves us from the realm of biology to the realm of history. If the Seeders sent the first bacteria billions of years ago, did they stop there? Or did they come back to check on their garden? Ancient cultures all across the globe say the exact same thing. The gods came down from the sky. We dismissed these stories as myths. We called them metaphors. But what if the ancient Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Mayans were not writing fiction? What if they were recording the return of the architects? As we leave the microscopic world of DNA and look at the macroscopic world of ancient stone, we find that the fingerprints of the Seeders are not just in our blood. They are carved into the very bedrock of our civilization. We leave the sterile environment of the laboratory and the microscopic world of DNA, and we travel back in time. We go back 6,000 years to the dusty plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq. This is the cradle of civilization. This is Sumer. According to mainstream history, this is where humanity woke up. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We lived in caves, we used simple stone tools, and our lives were defined by the daily struggle for food. Progress was agonizingly slow. A hand axe made in 100,000 BC looked almost identical to a hand axe made in 50,000 BC. And then, virtually overnight, everything changed. Around 3,800 BC, the Sumerian civilization appeared on the world stage, and it did not look like a society in its infancy. It appeared fully formed. In a flash of historical time, we went from dragging knuckles to building high-rise mud brick cities with complex plumbing systems. We went from counting on our fingers to developing advanced mathematics. The Sumerians didn't just stumble into civilization, they exploded into it. They had a bicameral Congress, a complex legal system, schools, pharmaceutical recipes, and a sophisticated understanding of astronomy that rivals our own until the invention of the telescope. Scholars call this the Sumerian Problem. How does a species stagnate for nearly 200,000 years and then suddenly invent writing, law, wheel, plow, and architecture all at the same time? If you look at the evolution of technology, there is usually a curve. You invent the steam engine, then the combustion engine, then the jet engine. But Sumer looks like someone dropped a jet engine into the Stone Age. They used a mathematical system based on the number 60, known as the sexagesimal system. It is a system so robust and accurate that we still use it today to measure time and geometry. Every time you look at a clock and see 60 seconds in a minute, or look at a compass and see 360 degrees in a circle, you are using Sumerian math. Why would a primitive people, just stepping out of the caves, need such a complex number system? What were they calculating? Mainstream historians will tell you that the Sumerians were simply geniuses who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. But if you ask the Sumerians, or rather if you read what they wrote, they tell a very different story. They were obsessed with record keeping. They didn't just leave behind a few vague cave paintings. They left behind tens of thousands of clay tablets. These tablets, written in a wedge-shaped script called cuneiform, cover everything from tax records to court cases. But they also cover history. And in their history, they are very clear about the source of their knowledge. They do not claim to have invented their civilization. They claim it was given to them. The Sumerian texts describe a time before civilization, a chaotic time when humans lived like animals. Then, they describe the arrival of the Anunnaki. The word strictly translates to those who from heaven to earth came. Not gods in the spiritual sense of an invisible creator, but physical beings who descended from the sky in flying birds and fiery whirlwinds. The tablets describe the Anunnaki as teachers and rulers. They describe them walking among men, eating, drinking, and making decisions. These were not silent idols made of stone. They were flesh and blood entities who wielded technology that the Sumerians could only describe as magic. One of the most famous artifacts is the Sumerian king list. It is a stone prism that lists the reigns of the kings of Sumer. It blends what we call history with what we call myth, without any distinction between the two. It lists historical kings who we know existed, but then it goes back further. It lists kings who reigned for thousands of years, referencing a time before the flood. It says, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. They are telling us explicitly the authority to rule, the concept of government, and the structure of society were not human ideas. They were imported. We have to ask ourselves, why would a civilization that was so precise about its tax records and its astronomy lie about its origins? If they were accurate about the movement of the planets, describing the color of Uranus and Neptune thousands of years before we discovered them with telescopes, why should we dismiss their history as a fairy tale? We accept their math. We accept their invention of the wheel. But when they tell us, the people from the sky taught us this, we say, no, You must be mistaken. This is the arrogance of the modern age. We assume ancient people were superstitious savages who invented gods to explain the rain. But the Sumerian descriptions of the Anunnaki are technical, not magical. They speak of the me, pronounced may, which were small, portable objects that held the information of civilization, codes for law, for music, for warfare. These sound less like divine blessings and more like data storage devices or software programs. The sudden rise of Sumer is the archaeological equivalent of the sudden expansion of the human brain. It is the second anomaly. First, our biology was upgraded. Then our society was upgraded. The timeline fits perfectly. The hardware was built, and then the software was installed. But who were these Anunnaki? Why did they come here? And most importantly, what did they want from us? The tablets provide an answer to that too, and it is not a comforting one. They didn't come here to be our friends. They came here because they had a job to do, and they needed workers. If the Sumerian tablets are to be believed, the arrival of the Anunnaki was not a diplomatic mission, it was an industrial expedition. We tend to romanticize the idea of contact with extraterrestrials. We imagine they would come to share wisdom, to cure our diseases, or to welcome us into the Galactic Federation. But the texts found in Mesopotamia tell a much more pragmatic story. They describe the Anunnaki as a species facing a crisis. According to the interpretations popularized by researchers like Zecharia Sitchin, their homeworld, often referred to as Nibiru, was suffering from a collapsing atmosphere. They needed a specific material to repair their planetary shield, a material that reflects heat and light, is non-reactive, and is virtually indestructible. They needed gold. Earth is rich in gold, and so they came. They established their base in the Eden, the biblical Eden, located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they set up mining operations in what they called the Abzu, believed to be Southeast Africa. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Anunnaki mined this gold themselves. But the work was brutal. The tablets describe a caste of lower-ranking Anunnaki, known as the Igigi, who were tasked with the back-breaking labor of digging into the earth. The texts read like a modern labor dispute. The Igigi groaned under the workload. They complained about the toil, and finally, they snapped. The tablets describe a mutiny. The Igigi burned their tools, surrounded the house of the chief commander, Enlil, and demanded relief. "The load is excessive! It kills us!" they cried. The High Council of the Anunnaki met to solve the problem. They couldn't stop the mining. The survival of their own planet depended on the gold, but they couldn't force their own people to continue. They needed a replacement workforce. They needed a biological machine that was smart enough to follow orders, strong enough to hold a pickaxe, but primitive enough to be controlled. This brings us to the most controversial figure in the Sumerian pantheon, Enki. He was the chief scientist, the geneticist of the gods. He proposed a solution. He said there was already a creature on the planet that could be adapted. He pointed to the wild man of the Abzu, likely Homo erectus or a similar early hominid. Enki said, "The being that we need already exists. We only have to bind upon it the image of the gods." This phrase, "bind upon it the image of the gods," is a chillingly accurate description of genetic engineering. It echoes the Bible.
Let us make man in our image. The tablets describe a process that sounds nothing like divine magic and everything like a laboratory procedure. Enki and his half-sister, Ninmah, took the clay of the earth, genetic material of the hominid, and mixed it with the blood of a god, Anunnaki DNA. They performed trial and error. The texts actually describe the failures. Beings that were born with defects, beings that couldn't breathe, beings that couldn't reproduce. It was a messy, scientific process of hybridization.
Finally, they succeeded. They created the Adamu. The word literally translates to the earthling, but it also implies the worker. We were designed. We were built with a specific purpose, to take the burden off the shoulders of the gods. This explains the anomaly of our evolution. It explains why we have back problems. We were bipedalized too quickly to carry loads. It explains why we have such a complex brain. We needed to understand language and commands. But we were also limited. We were given long lives compared to animals, but short lives compared to the gods. We were given intelligence, but not the wisdom of the heavens. We were capped. This origin story also introduces the fundamental conflict that has plagued humanity ever since. The conflict between Enki and Enlil. Enlil, the commander, viewed humans as nothing more than noisy, disposable tools. He was annoyed by our rapid multiplication. In later texts, he is the one who tries to wipe humanity out with the flood because we were becoming too numerous and too loud. Enki, on the other hand, developed a sympathy for his creation. He is the archetype of the trickster god, the Prometheus figure. When Enlil wanted to destroy humanity, it was Enki who whispered the warning to a human, Ziusudra, Noah, and told him to build a boat. This dynamic shapes the human psyche. We have a deep-seated racial memory of God being a dual entity. One side is the judge, the punisher, the one who demands obedience and sacrifice. The other side is the teacher, the savior, the one who brings knowledge, often forbidden knowledge. In the Bible, this is the serpent in the garden, offering the fruit of the tree of knowledge. In the Sumerian version, the serpent is not the devil. The serpent is Enki, the geneticist, trying to give his creation the ability to think for themselves, against the wishes of the military commander. If this theory is true, it is a crushing blow to human ego. We are not the center of the universe. We are not the beloved children of a benevolent creator. We are a GMO product, created to dig holes in the ground for a civilization that viewed us as livestock. It explains why we feel an innate subservience to higher powers. It explains why the earliest human religions were all about feeding, serving, and appeasing the gods. We weren't worshiping them. We were paying them. We were the workforce, terrified of the management. But something went wrong with the plan. The worker race started to wake up. The genetic splice was too good. We didn't just take orders, we started to ask questions. We started to look at the stars and wonder if we could go there too. And this terrified the architects. We have heard the story from the perspective of the Sumerians, who saw these beings as gods and rulers. But if we shift our focus just a few hundred miles to the west, to the ancient traditions of the Hebrews, we find the exact same story told from a very different perspective. In the Bible, specifically in the book of Genesis, there is a strange and fragmented passage that has confused theologians for centuries. Genesis chapter 6 says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose." It then says, "There were giants in the earth in those days." And that is it. The Bible moves on. It leaves us with a massive, unanswered question. Who were the sons of God? And why were they having children with human women? To find the answer, we have to look at the texts that were removed from the Bible. We have to look at the Apocrypha, specifically the Book of Enoch. This ancient text, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, was once considered sacred scripture. It was quoted by the apostles and studied by the early church fathers, but eventually it was banned. It was pushed out of the canon and hidden away for over 1,000 years. Why? Because it tells too much. It fills in the details that Genesis left out, and those details are terrifyingly specific about the nature of the Galactic Seeders. The Book of Enoch describes a group of 200 beings known as the Watchers. These were not ethereal spirits or floating ghosts. They were physical beings who descended from the heavens and landed on the summit of Mount Hermon, on the border of modern-day Syria and Lebanon. The text gives us their names. Their leader was Samyaza. These Watchers defied the laws of their own kind. They made a pact, a sworn oath to descend to Earth and interbreed with humanity. They were not here to guide us spiritually. They were here to mix their genetics with ours. The result of this forbidden union was the Nephilim, a race of hybrid giants. The text describes them as biological abominations, beings of immense strength and appetite who consumed the produce of men and eventually turned on humanity itself. This aligns perfectly with the Sumerian tales of demigods and heroes, the offspring of the Anunnaki. But the Book of Enoch goes further. It explains that the Watchers didn't just bring their DNA, they brought technology. This is the smoking gun for the Seeder theory. If the Watchers were truly spiritual angels, we would expect them to teach humanity about prayer, morality, or the nature of the soul. But they didn't. The Book of Enoch provides a specific curriculum of what the Watchers taught mankind, and it is entirely industrial and scientific. It says that the Watcher named Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He taught them the art of making them known, which is metallurgy. He taught them how to mine the earth for precious metals. Another Watcher taught the cutting of roots, which is botany and pharmacology. Another taught the observing of the stars, or astronomy. And perhaps most strangely, they taught the beautifying of the eyelids, the use of makeup and cosmetics. Why would a spiritual angel teach women how to wear eyeshadow? It makes no sense in a religious context. But in a colonization context, it makes perfect sense. They were uplifting a primitive species. They were teaching warfare, science, agriculture, and culture. They were accelerating our development, giving us tools we were not yet ready to use. The text describes the chaos that followed. The knowledge of metallurgy led to war. The knowledge of sorcery and root cutting led to corruption. The earth was filled with blood. The High God, the ultimate authority, looked down and saw that the experiment had gone wrong. The Watchers had broken the Prime Directive. They had contaminated the human gene pool and given advanced technology to a species that was still spiritually in its infancy. This triggered the judgment. The Watchers were bound and imprisoned in jagged valleys, perhaps a reference to a dimensional prison or an underground base. And the earth was cleansed with a great flood, to wipe out the Nephilim hybrids and restart the human experiment. When you lay the Book of Enoch next to the Sumerian tablets, the overlay is almost one-to-one. The Watchers are the Igigi, or the Anunnaki rebels. The Nephilim are the demigods. The Great Flood is exactly the same event described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. We are reading the same history book, just translated into two different languages. One calls them fallen angels and views them as demons who corrupted the world. The other calls them sky gods and views them as the bringers of civilization. But the core truth remains the same. We were visited, we were taught, and we were genetically modified. The fall of man wasn't eating an apple. It was a technological transfer that we couldn't handle. We are still living in the shadow of that event. We are still using the metallurgy taught by Azazel to build weapons of war. We are still obsessed with the stars taught by the Watchers. We are a species with Stone Age emotions and Space Age technology. A dangerous combination that was gifted to us by a group of renegade entities on the top of Mount Hermon. The Book of Enoch was banned because it humanizes the divine. It turns angels into biological defectors with lust and ambition. It turns demons into unauthorized teachers. It suggests that the line between heaven and outer space is non-existent. And if the Watchers are still bound in the earth, or if their lineage still runs through the human bloodline, then the story isn't over. The seeds they planted are still growing. If the texts of Sumer and the Book of Enoch are true, if advanced beings really did descend and teach early humans technology, then we should expect to find physical evidence. We should find things in the archaeological record that don't belong there. We should find the smoking guns of history. And we do. They are called OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts. These are objects that are technologically impossible for the time period in which they were found. Mainstream science calls them hoaxes or misinterpretations because they break the linear timeline of history. But if you view them through the lens of the Seeder theory, they are not anomalies, they are leftovers. Take, for example, the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, this object dates back to around 100 BC. When scientists X-rayed the corroded lump of bronze, they were stunned. Inside, they found a complex system of 30 interlocking gears, differential gearing, and precise dials. It was an analog computer designed to predict astronomical positions and eclipses with perfect accuracy. Nothing of this complexity appears again in history for another 1,500 years, until the mechanical clocks of the 14th century. Where did the Greeks get the knowledge to build a computer in an age of pottery? Did they invent it from scratch and then forget it for a millennium? Or was it a remnant of the forbidden knowledge passed down from the Watchers? Then there is the Baghdad Battery. Found in Iraq, the ancient land of Sumer, these are clay jars containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic liquid like grape juice or vinegar, they produce a steady electric current. These date back to the Parthian period, roughly 200 BC. Mainstream archaeology suggests they were used for religious rituals or pain relief. But let's be logical. If you have a battery, you have electricity. If you have electricity, what were you powering? Some theorists suggest they were used for electroplating gold onto silver, a technique that requires chemical knowledge far beyond the accepted level of the time. Were the magicians of the ancient world actually amateur chemists using batteries designed by their gods? But the most undeniable evidence isn't small gadgets. It is the massive stone structures that cover the planet. We are told that the Great Pyramid of Egypt, the walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and the temples of Baalbek in Lebanon were built by people using copper chisels and stone hammers. Yet these structures feature stones weighing up to 1,000 tons, cut with laser-like precision. In Pumapunku, Bolivia, we find diorite blocks, one of the hardest stones on Earth, drilled with perfect, equidistant holes and routed with geometric grooves that look like they were machine-tooled. You cannot cut diorite with copper. You need diamond-tipped saws and high-speed drills. How did a civilization without the wheel or steel transport these stones up mountains and cut them like butter? The answer might lie in the forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers. The Book of Enoch specifically says they taught the cutting of roots and the signs of the earth. This could imply a form of technology based on sound or vibration, acoustic levitation. We have myths from all over the world describing priests or gods moving stones with music or trumpets. We dismiss these as fairy tales, but we know today that sound waves can levitate small objects. If the Seeders possessed a mastery of physics we are only beginning to understand, then building the pyramids wasn't a miracle. It was engineering. We also see evidence of advanced medical knowledge. Trepanation, the drilling of holes into the skull to relieve pressure, was practiced thousands of years ago with surprising success rates. We find skulls in Peru with gold plates fused into the bone to repair injuries, showing a level of surgical skill that rivals modern medicine. We find ancient Indian texts, the Sushruta Samhita, describing plastic surgery and cataract removal. Where did they learn this? Did they figure out complex neurosurgery by trial and error? Or were they following a manual? The existence of these artifacts suggests a terrifying possibility. History is not a straight line of progress. It is a cycle of rise and fall. Humanity has been high-tech before. Or rather, we have had access to high-tech before. We were like children given the keys to a Ferrari. We didn't know how to build the car, but we knew how to drive it. And eventually, we crashed it. The OOPArts are the wreckage of that crash. They are the pieces of the Ferrari scattered in the Stone Age mud. This leads to the concept of the cargo cult. In World War II, islanders in the Pacific saw American planes land, bringing food and supplies. When the war ended and the planes left, the islanders built straw replicas of the planes and runways, hoping to summon the gods back. Are our temples, our pyramids, and our rituals just cargo cult behavior? Are we imitating the technology of the Seeders with stone and prayer, trying to bring them back? The mitre hat worn by the Pope looks suspiciously like the fish head helmets depicted on the priests of Dagon and the Anunnaki. The scepter of the king looks like a weapon or a tool of power. We are mimicking the technology of the past, hoping for the same result. The forbidden knowledge wasn't just about making life easier. It was about power. And that power destroyed the ancient world. The myths tell us that the gods grew angry with humanity's corruption and wiped the slate clean with a flood. But the artifacts remain. The gears of the Antikythera mechanism, the batteries of Baghdad, and the laser-cut stones of Pumapunku are the silent witnesses. They scream at us from the dirt, telling us that we have forgotten who we are. We are a species with amnesia, walking through the ruins of a civilization we don't remember building, holding tools we don't remember how to use. If the story of the Anunnaki was only found on the clay tablets of Iraq, we could dismiss it as the isolated folklore of a single culture. We could say that the Sumerians simply had a very vivid imagination. But a lie does not spread across oceans before the invention of the boat. A hallucination does not appear in the minds of people separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. When we look at the indigenous histories of Africa, the Americas, and Asia, we do not find different stories. We find the same story, told in different languages, starring the same entities. Deep in Mali, West Africa, lives a tribe called the Dogon. For centuries, they have possessed a cosmology that shouldn't exist. The Dogon priests speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the sky in a spinning arc, accompanied by fire and thunder. The Nomo taught the Dogon the secrets of the universe. Specifically, they taught them about the star system Sirius. The Dogon knew, long before modern astronomy, that Sirius was not a single star. They knew it had a companion, a tiny, heavy, invisible star known as Sirius B. They knew its orbital period was 50 years. They knew it was made of super-dense matter. Western scientists scoffed at this. Sirius B is invisible to the naked eye. It was only confirmed by Western telescopes in the mid-20th century. How did a tribe in the African desert know the specific orbital mechanics of an invisible star system centuries before the telescope was invented? The Dogon are clear. The Nomo told us. And who were the Nomo? They are described exactly like the Oannes of Babylon or Enki of Sumer, fish-like, amphibious teachers who brought civilization. The description is identical. The source is identical. The knowledge is impossible. Cross the Atlantic Ocean to the deserts of Arizona, and you meet the Hopi Indians. Their legends speak of the Star People. They believe their ancestors came from the Pleiades, but most interestingly, they speak of the Ant People. During the great cataclysms of the past, when the world was destroyed by fire and ice, the Hopi were guided by the Ant People into deep underground caves to survive. The Hopi word for ant is Anu. The Hopi word for friend is Naki. Put them together, Anunnaki, ant friends. Is it a coincidence that the Sumerian word for those who came from heaven is Anunnaki? Is it a coincidence that the Hopi describe these beings as having large heads and slender bodies, similar to the grey alien archetype or the depictions of Sumerian gods? The linguistic bridge between ancient Mesopotamia and ancient America is impossible to explain by conventional history. These two cultures should never have met, yet they share the same word for the same beings who saved humanity from the same flood. Travel further south to the jungles of Mexico, and you find the Maya and the Aztecs. Their entire culture is built around the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He is described not as a monster, but as a tall, bearded, light-skinned man who wore strange clothes and arrived from the sea. He taught them mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture. He forbade human sacrifice, a practice that only returned after he left. He promised he would return one day from the stars to judge his people. This feathered serpent is the exact same archetype as the serpent Enki in Sumer, or the Naga in India, or the dragon kings of China. Why is the serpent associated with wisdom and knowledge in every ancient culture? In the Bible, the serpent gives knowledge. In DNA, the double helix looks like two intertwined serpents. The symbol of modern medicine, the caduceus, is two serpents on a staff. The Seeders didn't just leave their genes, they left their brand logo. And then there is the visual evidence. If you look at the stone carvings of the Anunnaki in Iraq, they are often depicted holding a strange object in their hand. It looks like a bucket or a handbag. Archaeologists call it the bandudu, a container for the water of life. But if you go to the ruins of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the oldest temple in the world dating back 12,000 years, you see the exact same handbag carved onto the pillars. If you go to La Venta in Mexico and look at the Olmec statues, you see a figure holding the exact same handbag. You see it in Maori art in New Zealand. How does the same specific designer handbag appear in the hands of gods in Iraq, Turkey, Mexico, and New Zealand, separated by thousands of years and vast oceans? There was no internet. There was no mail service. The only explanation is that these cultures were not inventing these gods. They were documenting the same visitors. The handbag was likely a piece of technology, a standard-issue toolkit for the Seeders, just like a doctor carries a stethoscope or a soldier carries a rifle. The humans saw it, didn't understand what it was, so they carved it as a bag. This global consistency is the final nail in the coffin of the myth theory. A myth is a local story. A reality is a global event. The Seeders were not a hallucination of the Middle East. They were a planetary phenomenon. They touched every corner of the globe, seeding knowledge, building megaliths, and leaving behind a legacy that we are only now beginning to piece together. We have looked at the biology. We have looked at the history. We have looked at the global corroboration. The evidence suggests that we are a species with a forgotten past, a hybrid race raised by absentee parents. But if they left, did they leave us empty-handed? Or did they leave a map? As it turns out, the map isn't buried in the sand. It is buried inside us. We have looked at the stones, the myths, and the blood. Now, we must look at the code itself. If humanity is a genetically engineered species, a product of the Anunnaki binding the image of the gods onto the creature of the earth, then there must be scars. When you perform surgery, you leave a scar. When you edit a film, you leave a splice mark. And when you edit a genome, you leave a trace. For decades, geneticists have known about a specific anomaly in human DNA that sets us apart from every other primate on Earth. It is called chromosome 2. To understand why this is the smoking gun, we have to look at the math of the great apes. Humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all share a common ancestor. We are a family. But there is a glaring discrepancy in the family album. Chimpanzees have 24 pairs of chromosomes. Gorillas have 24 pairs. Orangutans have 24 pairs. Every great ape has 48 chromosomes in total. But humans? We have 23 pairs. We have 46 chromosomes. This is a massive problem for evolutionary theory. If we evolved from a common ancestor with the apes, we should have the same number of chromosomes. You cannot just lose 2 chromosomes and remain a viable species. If a primate is born missing a pair of chromosomes, it dies, or it is severely disabled. Biology does not subtract information, it conserves it. So, where did the missing pair go? Did it vanish? No. It was hidden.
In 2005, the Human Genome Project gave us the answer, and it was shocking. We didn't lose a pair of chromosomes. 2 separate ape chromosomes were fused together to make one giant human chromosome. This is Human Chromosome 2. It is the second largest chromosome in our body, and it is a patchwork quilt of our primate past. We know this because of the markings on the DNA itself. Think of a chromosome like a shoelace. At the ends of the shoelace, you have plastic caps called telomeres. These caps protect the DNA from unraveling. Telomeres are only supposed to be found at the tips of the chromosome. But in Human Chromosome 2, we find telomeres right in the middle. We find the caps of the shoelaces buried deep inside the strand, exactly where the 2 ancestral chromosomes were glued together. Furthermore, every chromosome has a centromere, a pinched waistline that acts as the handle for cell division. A normal chromosome has 1 centromere. Human Chromosome 2 has 2. One is active, and the other is a fossilized centromere, a remnant that has been turned off. This is forensic proof. It is undeniable evidence that at some point in our history, 2 distinct chromosomes from our primate ancestors were taken and fused into one single unit. Mainstream science accepts this fusion. It is a fact. But they explain it as a natural accident. They argue that a random mutation caused the chromosomes to fuse, and this mutation just happened to create a smarter, better species. But the odds of this are astronomical. In nature, chromosomal fusions, known as Robertsonian translocations, are usually catastrophic. They lead to sterility. Think of a mule. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. It has a mismatched number of chromosomes. It is strong, it is alive, but it is sterile. It cannot reproduce. For the chromosome 2 fusion to stick, it would have to happen in a single individual. That individual would have to survive, be fertile, find a mate who also had the exact same random mutation, which is statistically impossible, and then their offspring would have to outcompete every other primate on the planet. It is a lottery win upon a lottery win.
However, if you look at this through the lens of the Galactic Seeder theory, it makes perfect sense. This wasn't an accident. It was a splice. It was the moment Enki took the clay of the earth, the 24-pair primate genome, and modified it. By fusing these chromosomes, the architects created a new species that was genetically distinct from the animal kingdom. This fusion is likely what unlocked our higher cognitive functions. It created the genetic barrier that prevents us from breeding with chimps. It isolated us. It made us human. This is the laboratory signature we have been looking for. It is the equivalent of finding a line of computer code that says, "Copyright Microsoft," inside a Linux operating system. It shouldn't be there, unless someone put it there. The presence of the telomeres in the middle of the chromosome is the scar of the surgery. We are walking around with the evidence of our artificial creation in every single cell of our bodies. And this fusion happened relatively recently in geological time. Around the same time the human brain exploded in size, around the same time tools appeared, around the same time the missing link should be. The timeline fits, the biology fits, the myths fit. The Anunnaki didn't just teach us math, they rewired our hardware. They turned off the primate instincts and turned on the human potential. And they did it by zipping 2 chromosomes together. But if DNA is the code, there is still the question of the program. DNA is just a storage device. What information is stored on it? For years, scientists called 97% of our DNA junk DNA
because it didn't seem to do anything. It didn't code for proteins, it just sat there. But now, we are realizing that junk might actually be the most important part of the manual. It might be the message the Seeders left for us to read once we were smart enough to decode it.
If chromosome 2 is the hardware hack, then junk DNA is the encrypted software. When scientists first mapped the human genome, they expected to find a massive library of instructions for building a human being. They found the library, but they were shocked to discover that nearly 97% of the books were seemingly blank. Only about 3% of our DNA actually codes for proteins, the building blocks of our body. The rest, the vast majority, was dismissed as evolutionary debris. They called it junk DNA. They assumed it was just leftovers from millions of years of viral infections and random mutations, a biological trash can that served no purpose. But nature is efficient. Nature does not carry 97% dead weight. If you carried a backpack where 97% of the contents were garbage, you would dump it out to move faster. Evolution should have streamlined our genome millions of years ago. The fact that this junk has been preserved, replicated, and passed down with extreme fidelity suggests that it is not junk at all. It is silent. And in the world of coding, silence doesn't mean emptiness. It means dormancy. Think of your computer. The operating system, Windows or Mac OS, takes up a huge amount of space, but you don't use it directly like you use a Word document. It runs in the background. It regulates. It controls. Geneticists are now realizing that this non-coding DNA acts like an operating system. It tells the active genes when to switch on and when to switch off. It is the master control program. But the Galactic Seeder theory asks a deeper question. Is there a message hidden in the noise? The physicist Paul Davies proposed a fascinating concept. He argued that if an advanced alien civilization wanted to leave a message for humanity, a message that would survive for millions of years, they wouldn't carve it into stone because stone erodes. They wouldn't broadcast it via radio waves because signals fade. They would encode it into the one thing that self-replicates, repairs itself, and endures as long as life exists: DNA. He suggested that our cells are messages in a bottle, waiting for us to develop the technology to read them. Researchers who have analyzed the patterns in non-coding DNA have found linguistic features. The sequence of nucleotides follows a structure similar to human language: syntax, grammar, and rules. It is not random noise. It is a language we don't speak yet. Some researchers, like Greg Braden, have popularized the God code theory. By assigning numerical values to the chemical elements of DNA, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and matching them to the Hebrew alphabet, they claim to have found a repeating message in every cell of the human body. That message translates roughly to God eternal within the body. Whether you accept the linguistic translation or not, the implication is staggering. It suggests that we are walking hard drives. We might be carrying the history of the galaxy, the blueprints for advanced technology, or the coordinates of our homeworld, encoded in the parts of our DNA we thought were useless. This aligns with the ancient concept of the Akashic records, the idea that all knowledge is stored in the ether. Perhaps it's not in the ether. Perhaps it's in the enzymes. This also touches on the concept of activation. In New Age and spiritual circles, there is a constant talk of DNA activation. The idea is that we are currently operating on a limited bandwidth. The Seeders capped us. They gave us enough code to be smart workers, but they locked out the higher functions: telepathy, rapid healing, extended lifespan. These functions are sitting in the junk DNA, dormant, waiting for a key. What is the key? Is it a frequency? Is it a solar event? Is it a level of consciousness? Many ancient cultures speak of a time when the gods will return to wake us up. Maybe they don't need to land spaceships. Maybe they just need to send a signal that unlocks the encrypted partition of our hard drive. We see hints of this potential in savants, people who can calculate complex math in seconds or remember every moment of their lives. These people have access to a part of the brain and a processing power that the rest of us are locked out of. Are they glitches in the firewall? If the Seeders left us here as a nursery or a colony, it makes sense that they would leave a manual. But they wouldn't leave the manual on a library shelf where it could be burned. They wrote it into the ink and paper of our own bodies. We are looking at the stars for answers, but the answer is looking back at us from under the microscope. We are the artifact. We are the probe. And if our internal biology is a circuit board, then the planet we live on is the motherboard. The Seeders didn't just engineer the life forms, they engineered the planet itself. They built a grid. They placed their stone monuments on specific energy lines, creating a global network that mirrors the neural network inside our heads. As above, so below. If our DNA is the software code written by the architects, then the Earth itself is the motherboard. We tend to view the ancient world as disconnected. We imagine the Egyptians building pyramids in the desert, the Mayans building temples in the jungle, and the Druids dragging stones in England, all completely unaware of each other. But if you look at the globe from the perspective of a geometer, you see that these sites are not random. They are connected. They are nodes in a massive planetary grid system that implies a level of planning that is nothing short of godlike. This concept is known as the world grid. Researchers who have mapped the coordinates of the most significant ancient megaliths, the Great Pyramid of Giza, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, and Angkor Wat, have discovered that they align perfectly on specific geometric bands. These are often called ley lines or telluric energy currents. It is as if the ancients were building their monuments on top of an invisible energy wiring system that runs beneath the Earth's crust. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the most precise structure ever built. It is aligned to true north with an accuracy that we can barely match today with laser technology. But its location is even more significant. It sits at the exact center of the Earth's landmass. If you take all the continents and calculate the geographical center, you land on the Giza Plateau. How did the Egyptians, who supposedly thought the Earth was flat or had limited knowledge of the Americas, know where the center of the world was? They couldn't. But a species capable of space travel, a species capable of seeing the planet from orbit, would know exactly where to place the anchor of the grid. And the Great Pyramid is not a tomb. No mummy was ever found in it. No hieroglyphs eulogizing a dead pharaoh were carved on its original walls. It is a machine. The granite used in the king's chamber contains high amounts of quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates electricity when under pressure. The pyramid is built on top of an aquifer. The rushing water below creates vibration. The vibration puts pressure on the quartz, and the quartz generates an electromagnetic field. Nikola Tesla, the father of modern electricity, was obsessed with the pyramids. He believed they were wireless energy towers, designed to transmit power globally through the ionosphere. Were the Seeders terraforming the planet? Were they building a wireless power grid to sustain their technology, or perhaps to stabilize the planet's vibration? Move across the ocean to Teotihuacan in Mexico. The layout of this city, with its massive Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon, mimics the layout of the solar system. The distances between the temples correspond to the orbital distances of the planets. But here's the catch. They included temples for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These planets were not discovered by modern science until the last few centuries. Yet the architects of Teotihuacan knew they were there. They were building a scale model of the Seeders' neighborhood on the surface of our planet. Even the units of measurement are suspicious. The megalithic yard, a unit found in stone circles from Britain to Jerusalem, is derived from the circumference of the Earth. It is a geodetic unit. You cannot derive it unless you know the size of the planet. This means the builders didn't just have hammers and chisels. They had satellites and calculus. This global network suggests that Earth was being prepared. It was being set up. You don't build a power grid for a group of hunter-gatherers. You build a power grid for a civilization that is planning to stay, or for a civilization that is running a massive experiment. Some theorists believe this grid is a containment field, a frequency fence designed to keep human consciousness within a certain range. Others believe it is an acupuncture system for the Earth, keeping the planet's magnetic field stable during cosmic shifts. Whatever its purpose, the grid proves that the intervention was total. They edited the biology, DNA. They edited the culture, civilization. And they edited the geography, the pyramids. It was a full-spectrum dominance operation. We are living in a terraformed environment, walking through the ruins of a machine we have forgotten how to turn on. But this raises the ultimate question. If they went to all this trouble, if they spliced the genes, built the cities, and wired the planet, why did they leave? Or did they? The final piece of the puzzle is not about what they did in the past, but what they are doing right now. The harvest theory suggests that the experiment has a deadline. And if we look at the state of the world today, the acceleration of technology, and the sudden interest in UFOs, it feels like the deadline is approaching. The gardeners are coming back to check the crop. We have looked at the evidence. We have seen the sudden expansion of the human brain, the strange fusion of chromosome 2, the impossible knowledge of the Sumerians, and the global grid of megalithic structures. If we accept the premise that humanity is a seeded species, a product of intelligent design by an advanced civilization, then we are left with one final, haunting question. Why? Why would a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization capable of traversing the stars and terraforming planets care about a small, watery rock on the edge of the Milky Way? Why go to the trouble of splicing genes and building pyramids? The answer depends on what kind of relationship we have with the Seeders. Are we their children? Are we their experiment? Or are we their livestock? There are three main theories that attempt to explain our purpose here, and each one paints a very different picture of our future. The first theory is known as the zoo hypothesis. This is the most neutral and scientific explanation. It suggests that Earth is a nature preserve. Just as we designate national parks to protect wildlife from industrialization, the Seeders have designated Earth as a protected zone. In this scenario, the silence of the universe, the Fermi paradox, is not because nobody is out there, but because they are obeying a strict policy of non-interference. They are the scientists behind the one-way mirror. They are watching us to see how a civilization develops from the Stone Age to the Space Age, without direct help. This theory aligns with the Star Trek concept of the Prime Directive. If an advanced culture revealed itself to us right now, our culture would collapse. We would worship them or wage war on them. We wouldn't be authentic anymore. So they keep their distance. The UFO sightings, the abductions, the fleeting glimpses, these are just the park rangers checking the tags on the animals. In this view, the harvest is simply the moment we are mature enough to open the cage door ourselves. When we stop killing each other and master zero-point energy, we will be invited to join the galactic community. We are not prisoners. We are just not ready for the adults' table. The second theory is far darker. It is known as the farm hypothesis. This theory suggests that the Seeders are not benevolent scientists, but parasitic overlords. In the same way that we farm cows for milk or meat, they farm us for something we produce. But they don't need our flesh, they need our energy. This concept appears in Gnostic texts, which speak of the archons, entities that feed on the spiritual light of humanity. In modern terms, it is sometimes called Loosh, a vibrational energy generated by intense human emotion. Think about the history of the world. It is a history of perpetual war, fear, pain, and chaos. If the Seeders are so advanced, why didn't they fix us? Why did they leave us with a brain that is wired for aggression and tribalism? The farm hypothesis says this is a feature, not a bug. They engineered us to be emotional reactors. When we are afraid, when we fight, when we suffer, we emit a specific frequency that these entities consume. The grid we discussed earlier isn't to stabilize the planet. It's a milking machine. It captures the energy output of the human population. This theory explains why the world never seems to find peace. Peace is bad for business. If the flock is calm, the energy output drops. This is the Matrix scenario, where we are batteries powering a system we cannot see.
The third theory is the nursery hypothesis. This is the most hopeful, yet also the most melancholic. It suggests that the Seeders are a dying race. Perhaps they advanced too far into technology and lost their biological connection to the source. They became sterile, or they became like machines, cold, logical, and emotionless. They realized that in gaining the stars, they lost their souls. So they came to Earth to start over. In this scenario, we are not just an experiment. We are the backup drive. They mixed their advanced DNA with the robust, emotional, vital DNA of the primitive primates to create a hybrid that had the best of both worlds, the capacity for high intelligence and the capacity for deep emotion. We are the vessel for their legacy. They are not waiting to harvest us. They are waiting to become us. They are guiding us toward a level of evolution where they can reincarnate into these bodies, or where we can rejoin them to revitalize their species. This explains the obsession with bloodlines and genetics. It explains why they taught us civilization, but then let us struggle, because we needed to develop resilience. We are the children of the stars in a literal sense. The parents are watching from orbit, proud but anxious, waiting for the child to grow up and take over the family business. Which theory is true? Perhaps it is a mixture of all three. Perhaps there are different factions of Seeders, some who want to protect the zoo, some who want to exploit the farm, and some who are nurturing the nursery. This would explain the conflicting messages in our religions and myths. The gods who want to destroy us versus the gods who want to save us. Enlil versus Enki. The struggle continues above our heads. But regardless of the motive, all three theories agree on one thing. The experiment has a timeline. We are approaching a threshold. The population is exploding, technology is merging with biology, and the planet is vibrating at a new frequency. We are reaching the end of the cycle. The harvest is not a sci-fi concept for the distant future. It is happening now. The veil is thinning. The question is, when the keepers of the garden return, will they find a weed to be pulled or a flower to be picked? We are living in the most significant moment in human history. For thousands of years, we have walked this planet in a state of amnesia, disconnected from our origins, working the soil, fighting wars, and building empires that turn to dust. We have been operating on the hardware of the primate and the software of the slave. But something is changing. You can feel it. The acceleration of time, the breakdown of old systems, the explosion of information, and the sudden global hunger for truth. The cycle is ending. The Great Year, the 26,000-year cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes, is turning the page. We are moving out of the age of darkness and into the age of light. This is often called the shift. In scientific terms, it might look like a magnetic pole flip or a solar event. But in evolutionary terms, it is the activation of the dormant code. The junk DNA we discussed, the 97% of our genome that has been silent for millennia, is beginning to wake up. The environmental stressors, the cosmic radiation, and the shift in planetary frequency are acting as the trigger mechanism. The lock that Enki placed on our genetics is breaking. We are witnessing the birth of a new species. Anthropologists call us Homo sapiens sapiens, man who knows that he knows. But the mystics and the futurists see something else coming. They call it Homo luminous, the being of light. This is the next rung on the ladder. If the Anunnaki intervened to jumpstart us from animal to human, the next intervention is happening from within. We are evolving from a carbon-based consciousness, rooted in survival and fear, to a crystalline-based consciousness, rooted in connection and creation. This explains the chaos we see in the world right now. When a caterpillar dissolves into a butterfly, the process is messy. The old structure must completely disintegrate before the new one can emerge. The wars, the corruption, the economic collapses, these are not signs of the end. They are the breaking of the shell. The old control grid, the farm that fed on human fear, is losing its grip because the frequency of the planet is rising too high for it to function. So, where are the Seeders? Why haven't they landed on the White House lawn to stop the wars or save the environment? Because that would defeat the purpose of the experiment. If they save us, we learn nothing. If they carry us, we remain children. They are waiting for us to save ourselves. They are waiting for us to realize that the technology we need isn't the spaceship, it's the human body. It's the consciousness that drives it. We are the technology. We are the portal. The evidence is all around us. The impossible architecture of the pyramids proves we have greatness in our past. The fusion of chromosome 2 proves we have complexity in our blood. The myths of the Watchers prove we are not alone. But the most important piece of evidence is the feeling in your chest right now. That subtle, nagging sensation that you don't quite belong here. That you are in this world, but not of it. That longing you feel when you look up at the stars is not just imagination. It is a memory. It is the homing beacon of a species that knows, deep down, that its roots are not in the mud, but in the sky. We are the bridge between the animal and the divine. We are the synthesis of the earthly primate and the galactic voyager. That is our burden, but it is also our power. We have the grounded strength of Gaia and the creative spark of the cosmos. We are the only beings capable of bringing heaven to earth. That was the mission all along. Not to escape Earth, but to transform it. To turn the farm back into the garden. The Galactic Seeders are not our gods. They are our ancestors. They are our cousins. And in some timelines, they are our future selves reaching back to pull us forward. The test is almost over. The classroom is closing. The final exam is not a math test. It is a frequency test. Can you hold the vibration of love in a world designed for fear? Can you remember who you are when the world tells you that you are nothing? The story of humanity is not a tragedy. It is an epic, and we are in the final chapter. The harvest is here, but we are not the wheat to be cut down. We are the seeds ready to be scattered among the stars. The quarantine is lifting. The amnesia is fading. Open your eyes. Look in the mirror. You are the one you have been waiting for. If you are hearing my voice right now, you are the exception. We live in an age of distraction. The world is designed to keep your eyes moving, your mind racing, and your spirit asleep. The algorithm feeds you seconds, but you just invested an hour. You sat with the questions. You sat with the discomfort. You sat with the possibility that reality is not what you were told. That sets you apart. It means the frequency of this message found a match in you. Most people clicked away when we challenged their history. Others left when we questioned their biology. But you are still here. This tells me that you are not just a viewer. You are a seeker. You are part of the remnant that is beginning to remember. This documentary was not just a story. It was a foundation. But a foundation is useless if you do not build upon it. Here at Detunes Reality, we are not interested in entertainment. We are interested in detuning the noise of the illusion and retuning to the frequency of the truth. We are building a library for the awakening mind. We are mapping the edges of the map. This journey is far from over. In fact, we have barely scratched the surface. We are going to go deeper into the forbidden, the ancient, and the divine. The algorithm will try to bury this. The noise will try to make you forget. So, before you leave, anchor this moment. Prove that the transmission was received. Prove that the cycle is broken. Go to the comments below and write 2 words. 2 words that terrify the controllers,
but liberate the soul. I remember. Let that be your signal to the others. Let them know they are not alone. I remember. If you are ready to walk that path, if you are ready to stop consuming and start understanding, then align yourself with us. Subscribe. Turn on the signal. Don't let the amnesia take hold again. Welcome to the 1%. Welcome to D-Tune's reality.